grade 7s, here I am with my Whitney's Kiss, and we'll be looking at chapter 11 today. So much had happened in Whitney's life that it seemed like a year had gone by in less than 2 months. And yet, the last week of the first term seemed to have rushed upon her. The test week was looming ahead. For Whitney and her class, this meant the time had arrived for the English oral assignment. A speech about something or someone that has changed your life. It was Monday morning, and Whitney's turn came second. She was nervous, but she tried not to show it. She was certain there would be marks for confidence. Mrs. Pillay allowed them to have a small piece of paper with them, with notes or keywords. And when Whitney got to the front of the class, she carefully unfolded her speech paper. Today, I'm going to tell you about a teacher who has changed my life, she began. She looked around the class. Only a few people were looking at her. Some were looking down, going over their own speeches. Others were fidgeting. She glanced towards Mrs. Pillay, who was peering at her over her reading glasses. Her eyes were smiling vaguely, Whitney noticed. She cleared her throat and continued, following her notes carefully. She explained why she loved and respected this teacher, how she had seen the way this teacher was at home. She mentioned how this teacher had been caring and forgiving, even when she disappointed her. She told the class how the teacher had taught her about values and about making decisions. Whitney looked at the class again. There was no interest from her peers. It was just another speech, a boring recital that nobody needed to listen to, except the teacher who gave the marks. She looked at Mrs. Pillay again, who motioned to Whitney to carry on. But she could not carry on, not like this. If she wanted to make a difference, if she wanted to tell the truth, now was the time to do it, she thought to herself. Whitney crumpled up the little paper in her hand. It fell to the floor. All of a sudden, there was a lump in her throat. She swallowed hard a few times and closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them again, more people were looking at her. They sensed something different was about to happen. Years ago, there was an incident at my father's work. A man was bleeding to death, and my father saved him. But my father did not use gloves, and he did not realize he had had an open cut on his hand. He only saw it later, when he washed the man's blood off his hands. The man my father saved was HIV positive, and my father got infected with HIV that day. All eyes were fixed on Whitney now. The fidgeting had stopped. She continued her story, explaining how her father eventually got AIDS and how he'd started to suffer. She explained that she never knew he had AIDS until he was taken up into the hospital last month, and how she was made to promise to keep it a secret that her father had AIDS. My father knew there would be no understanding for how he got HIV in the first place. He said it would make no difference to the other people how he got it. He would be an outcast, and his family too. He said there are some people whose homes got burned down because the neighbors found out they were HIV positive. He said if people at school found out, I would be treated like an alien, like some freak with a fearsome infectious disease. He said I would be an outcast and I would lose all my friends. That is why I had to say it was cancer. Whitney paused. Then she said, and my father was right. I have lost all my friends. For the last few weeks, I've lived like someone with AIDS. Even though I do not have AIDS, I'm not even HIV positive. I know that because I never did anything that could give me HIV. And to prove it, I went for a test last week. 2 or 3 children gasped softly. Whitney walked back to her desk quickly and retrieved a paper from her bag. She returned to the front and held up the paper. Here is my HIV test result, she said. You can come and see for yourself afterwards. There was a ripple of hushed astonishment. Lindiwe avoided eye contact. And while all this was happening, the one person whom I thought I could trust nearly killed me. I'm ashamed to tell you that I nearly did get HIV, but not from my father. I nearly slept with someone who is HIV positive, Whitney said. Lindiwe looked up with a gasp. She looked at her friend now, her eyes wide with shock. She knew Whitney was talking about Lucky. The rest of the class was spellbound. You see, the teacher I was telling you about is Mrs. Pillay. I had told Mrs. Pillay and one other person about my father's AIDS, and when you guys all found out, I assumed Mrs. Pillay had told somebody the truth. That's when I totally turned against her. I threw out everything she taught me and nearly made the biggest mistake of my life. I nearly slept with a boy who I thought I could trust. Emotion welled up within Whitney, and she tried to stay composed. It started so innocently. The first time it was just a kiss, but that kiss, it led to, she didn't quite know how to say it. It was such fun, but it nearly ruined me. I could have been infected with HIV so easily, guys, she said, her eyes brimming with tears. And I don't want any of you to make the same mistake. She wiped her eyes with her sleeve. I know, like, everybody does it and all that, but something doesn't make sense. We're all so afraid of getting AIDS, but the thing that gives us AIDS, we want to keep doing. You know what I mean? We'll turn our backs on friends who may be HIV positive for fear of getting it too, but at the same time, we are not willing to wait with sex or say no to sex. If we could all just decide to wait with sex until marriage, HIV and AIDS would maybe die out or something. All we need to do is say no. There were some nods of agreement in the class. Lindiwe was moved by what Whitney was saying. She felt terrible for having turned her back on her friend. And one thing I've learned is that sleeping with someone does not prove your love to that person. In fact, someone who puts pressure on you to have sex does not really love you. Real love means waiting. I didn't realize this before. I was so desperate to be loved and accepted by someone that I didn't think about all of this. I just wanted to go all the way. Now I realize why Mrs. Pillay said you have to decide what you want before you're with someone. And it was almost too late for me, but I was given another chance, and I've made some decisions now. Whitney looked around. Everyone's eyes were focused on her. She felt more confident now, and she swallowed away the lump in her throat. "Let's hear it," someone called from the back. "Yeah, tell us your decisions," someone else added. Whitney smiled. "I've decided," she continued, "that I'm going to stay a virgin until I get married. Nobody deserves to have me except my husband, and even he will have to wait until our wedding night before you do the deed," one of the guys finished the sentence for her. There was some laughter, and then the class cheered. "Exactly. And I have decided," Whitney continued when the cheers died down, "that I'm not going to do whatever everyone else is doing. If I need to go against the flow to avoid AIDS, then I'll do it. I do not want HIV, so I will not push myself into a situation where I can't say no. That means hands off and clothes on." The class laughed and cheered again. Lindiwe was smiling too. "Don't get those two confused," she said, causing more laughter. "I've also decided to treat all people the same, whether they have HIV or not. You never know how they got it, so you can't judge them. People with HIV and AIDS are normal people like you and me. They suffer a lot and they need love and support. I mean, we're all equal in God's eyes. It doesn't matter if you're a guy or a girl, black or white, HIV positive or HIV negative. We're all human beings." Loud cheers and applause greeted Whitney's words this time. There were whistles of approval. The class took a while to become quiet again. Finally, I've decided not to assume things when I don't know the facts. I have learned that you can't trust somebody too quickly before you know that person. And I also learned that you shouldn't lose trust too quickly in somebody you do know, Whitney said and looked towards Mrs. Pillay. There were more cheers. I have decided, Whitney added, that Mrs. Pillay is the best and coolest teacher in the house. At this, the whole class roared with applause. One by one, children stood up to give a standing ovation. Whitney was not sure whether the class was cheering for her or for Mrs. Pillay, but it didn't matter. Lindiwe was in tears and came up to give her friend a long hug. Rosie and Sibongile followed. Whitney glanced across and saw that her teacher was wiping her eyes. She smiled at her teacher and then burst into tears herself. Overcome with the emotion of the moment, Mrs. Pillay came over to join the group hug. She was so proud of Whitney. She just wished more young people could have listened to her story today. The chaos in the classroom continued until the bell rang. As her pupils left the room, Mrs. Pillay returned to her desk and wrote down an A next to Whitney's name for her oral assignment. She had done well. She had spoken from her heart. And that brings us to the end of chapter 11. Look out for chapter 12.